Divineress is a strange, mystical word. It is technically archaic, but it never saw much usage to begin with. Webster's 1820 dictionary spares it only a passing definition. Divineress, noun. A female diviner, a woman professing divination. A female diviner. Diviner, in English, ultimately derives from the Latin divinator, one who predicts the future. The feminine divineress is the same binary that divides duke and duchess in the English language. The word's unpopularity is partially due to the painful plural, divineresses. Despite its rather boring origin, divineress is preserved in some places, some rather odd. In the literary world, its most popular usage came with the once famous, now forgotten, poet John Dryden, who made use of the fancy word in his 1687 heroic poem, The Hind and the Panther. Beyond that, usage is scattered. Usually it appears in places of noted pagan connotation, female mystics, exotic pulp books, and occasionally in older translations of Greek and Latin. Words like oracle and prophetess were preferred though. Divineress then fell to the wayside. It does survive in one strange place though, Japan, or English translations of Japan. Like these. What are these? If you are a Japanophile, you guessed Miko. The English translation is shrine attendant, but there is no exact equivalent. They are not officiators like priestesses or priests, lack the monastic nature of nuns, and, well, are definitely not altar boys nor exactly groundskeepers. Because of this, English visitors in Japan found a useful application in divineress. So what exactly are the Miko, or divineresses, beside a difficult plural? Britannica gives the definition of Miko as Shinto attendant or shrine attendant. The Encyclopedia of Shinto describes the modern role of the Miko as, nowadays the term generally refers to a woman who assists shrine priests in ritual or clerical work. The ritual is often the dancing of the Mikagura, or transliterated as god music, otherwise known as the Sato Kagura. Performative dances assumed to be descended from the original role of the Miko as a woman possessing the magico-religious power to receive oracles from the kami in a state of spirit possession. Most modern Japanophiles often assume Miko are always female Shinto attendants, which is true today. Prior to 1868 legislation, though, Miko were often employed at both Shinto and Buddhist shrines until the Japanese state began to differentiate the two, and in rare circumstances, there were male Miko in rural locations, though they were not always equivalent. The term, in Japanese and English, always implies the feminine. It is important to differentiate the renderings of Miko and why divineress was adopted for it. The modern rendering in kanji is Miko. This character, Miko or Fu, is often translated as shaman or sorcerer. The character itself is a bit of anachronism in regards to the Miko's modern role. The second character, Ona or Jo, just sits there, judging. But in reality, it means woman. Thus, the transliteration is shaman woman, but that sounds two in translation. An older rendering in kanji is the ancient Miko. This one, kami or shin, means gods, spirits, or kami. This one, ko or shi, means child. This rendering places more emphasis on the Miko's role as a servant of the gods, although this rendering is no longer in common parlance. This older form is probably derived from the ancient honorific term Miko, pronounced the exact same but written differently. This Miko is a defunct word for the noble children of the emperor. Funnily enough, the first rendering of shaman woman is more in line with the Miko's shamanistic origins. Before modern times, so around the 1800s, the term Miko was rather general. It was an umbrella term for women employed, or dedicated to, both religious practice and religious entertainment. The iconic shrine girl is basically a modern invention, but a 200-year-old one. There were two categories of Miko in medieval Japan: the Aroki Miko, or literally wandering Miko, wandering entertainers employed for music in religious or court functions. These women were usually depicted with an instrument, prayer beads, or kasa, a pilgrim's hat. Then the Jinja Miko, or just Miko, young female clergy employed by religious shrines. Their obligations included things like boiling water, curing illness, dispelling misfortune, and spirit channeling. Centralization of the Japanese state eventually put an end to the wanderings of the Aroki Miko, but the Shrine Miko survived to today. The Miko's role was originally bifurcated. The ancient Kuchiyose, spirit channeling Miko, and Jinja, shrine or dancing Miko. The dancing seems to have grown out of the shamanistic practice of spirit channeling or divining, though. Early Japanese accounts of the Miko regard them of the class of crazed people alongside beggars and thieves. This is likely due to the Kuchiyose Miko's wild nature during spirit channeling to predict fate and divine omens. So what happened to the crazy spirit possession stuff? The Japanese government passed a law suppressing it, likely due to Western peer pressure. In 1873, the Miko Kindenrei, or Miko Prohibition Act, outlawed Miko oracles and the practice of spirit possession. The popular practice of dancing subsumed any leftover occultic purpose in the occupation. In fact, a majority of Miko dances were innovated by the Yoshida Shrine post-1873, parallel to Japan's modernization. The modern Miko is a sanitized version of the shamanistic practices over hundreds of years. American journalist and lovable walking identity crisis, Lafcadio Hearn, was well aware of the Miko's original purpose when he arrived in Japan in 1890, though. The unofficial founder of American Japanology, Weeb, Hearn was an astute observer and renderer of Japan for English audiences. His prior articles written about the folkloric practices of the Creole and Cajun people in New Orleans shone this penchant well. When modern superstitions are being traced back not only to Greek or Roman days, but beyond them through the dust of dead civilizations back to Asia's primitive fetish worship. Hearn depicted the role of the Miko as a direct parallel to the Greco-Roman oracles. Hearn's comparisons between the Miko and priestesses of the ancient world went deeper than simple gender. In his notes on Kitsuki, Hearn writes that, in ancient times, the Miko were akin to the Hellenic oracles at Delphi. Like the origins of theater in ancient Greek cultic rites, Hearn traced the origins of Japanese theater to the Miko in Japanese mythology. Just as the celebration of ancient Greek mystery cults became drama and comedy, Hearn hypothesized too the ancient spirit possession rituals of the Miko, or these Divineresses, became simple dancing. These comparisons even continued to the Vestal Virgins of ancient Rome. Hearn believed of the Miko and like. Formerly, the Miko was more than a mere officiant. The songs which he is still obliged to learn indicate that she was originally offered to the gods as a bride. Writing to an audience with almost no information on Japan, beside cheap pulp literature, Hearn fell back on classical references as an easy comparison, or intellectual shared ground. On the Japanese elements of worship and purification, the comparison was even extended across religious practice. In ancient Athens, a corresponding ceremony took place every year, in Rome every 4 years. Oharai is performed twice every year, in the 6th month and in the 12th month by the ancient calendar. It used to be not less obligatory than the Roman lustration, and the idea behind the obligation was the same as that which inspired the Roman laws on the subject. Now, it should be remembered that for the man of old Japan, as for the Greek or the Roman citizen of early times, religion consisted chiefly in the exact observance of multitudinous customs, and that it was therefore difficult to know whether, in performing the duties of the several cults, one had not inadvertently displeased the unseen. Analyzing the Buddhist Shinto religious structure of Japan, the conclusion was the archaic Divineress was a direct parallel to the ritualistic Miko. At the very small shrines there are few ceremonies, only offerings of food are presented. But at the great temples there are hierarchies of priests and priestesses, Miko, usually daughters of priests, and the ceremonies are elaborate and solemn. It is particularly at the Temple of Ise, where down to the 14th century the high priestess was a daughter of emperors, or at the Grand Temple of Izumo that the archaic character of the ceremonial can be studied to most advantage. There, in spite of the passage of that huge wave of Buddhism, which for a period almost subsumed the most ancient faith, all things remain as they were a score of centuries ago. Unfortunately, as the usage of Japanese terms in English became more acceptable in common and in scholarship, Divineress fell out of favor. Its fall in usage was due to being a victim of the pure Darwinian rules of the cannibalistic English language. Terms like prophetess, priestess, or the usually gender-neutral mystic, or simply preferred due to simplicity. Divineress will not be found in any list of common usage, but it retains a unique role and place in the history of Japanese translation. Hearn's writings preserved it fossilized alongside some interesting comparisons. The ancient Divineress, revived in translation. I'd like to give a sorceress thank you to my supporter, the Gel Samini family.